Good morning. My name, thank you, is Rebecca Fisher, and on behalf of First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware, I welcome you to our hybrid worship service, whether you are joining us in the sanctuary or online. Gwen Matthews, a fellow Unitarian Universalist, expressed my feelings like this: whoever you are, wherever you are from, whomever you love, whatever it is you have done, you are welcome here. You are welcome to this time, this space, this moment that we carve out of often busy and chaotic weeks. You are welcome to this time for collective breaths, for words, for music, for lighting candles, and for us to simply exist here together. I also, this morning, welcome back to our pulpit the Reverend Libby Smith. Reverend Libby Smith was ordained in 1992 and has served both as a parish minister and as a chaplain. And now that she's retired from congregational work, woohoo, good for you, she sees her work as a part-time patchwork ministry of trying to say yes, made up mostly of guest preaching and rites of passage. And she also adds that she enjoys having more time for her husband, her garden, and her cat. I'm sure all three benefit. She is delighted to return to Wilmington. Thank you, Reverend Libby. And then finally, last but not least, if you are new to Unitarian Universalism, an extra welcome. Unitarian Universalists value and encourage the individual search for truth and meaning, while we work in community to build a more compassionate, more just world for all. And we aspire to put love at the center of everything we do. If you do not already subscribe to our e-news, sign up on our website. And one program I hope you're planning to attend, and I'm contractually bound to mention this per Reverend Larry, is our Livestream Summer Camp, August 11th through the 13th. Please register by August 5th. You must register ahead of time. And the camp is a joyful way to play and learn and uplift yourself in body, mind, and spirit. Have you ever wondered what pagans mean when they honor the elements? Maybe you'd like to explore your creative side in different ways, art, origami, music. Or maybe you're seeking better ways to care for your mind, your body, and your spirit. Or maybe you're just looking for a good game of can jam. Google it. It starts with a K. Whether you already have deep friendships in this church community or are looking to get to know us better, camp is a great way to dive deeper. We mail brochures to the membership, but you can get a copy at the welcome table or under the name tags. If you can't find them there, I know there's a bunch on the piano back in the parish hall. Or you can find the information on our website, firstuuwilm.org. And look for the tab to connect and give, and then click on Live Stream under that tab. If your needs are more urgent than camp, we also are continuing our Centering Sundays. Today at noon in room 25, which is upstairs on the second floor of our education wing. Centering Sunday is a chance to share your suffering with the current state of the world and to find some uplift and a source of energy to continue. And now let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Come, enter with me this sacred space. Bring with you what is yours, a burdened heart, a joyous song, a wearied spirit, a seeking mind. Bring the gift of yourself to the altar. It is an honorable gift.
If you have a chalice at home, please join us in lighting it with these words by Rachel Naomi Remen. We are all here to grow in wisdom and learn how to love better. As we each do this in our own ways, we slowly become a blessing to those around us and a light to the world. This morning we're dedicating our chalice lighting to two gentlemen. First, Reverend Robert Latham, who was our interim minister in 2006 and 2007. He died June 14th at age 92. And those of you who remember him vividly, he was such a personality, and his sermons were amazing. And also, I know we've lit a candle to him before, but this is for Ebe Steinmetz, because later in the service we'll have a short tribute to him. So we're welcoming Eben to our circle this morning as well. Now please rise in body or spirit and join in singing hymn number 323, Break Not the Circle. The words will be posted on the screen. Please remain standing after the hymn for the unison affirmation. And now, please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
Would you enter with me into a spirit of meditation and prayer? Gracious Spirit of life, into this community where we come seeking strength and common purpose, we bring our joys, our sorrows, our dreams, and our fears. We turn our minds and hearts toward one another in trust, offering love, seeking comfort, grieving and celebrating together as life calls us onward. We are part of the web of life that makes us one with all humanity, one with all the universe. We hold tenderly in our hearts all who sorrow today and pray for them courage and comfort. and our hearts sing with those who are joyful, and we join in their rejoicing. We know and we feel that we are connected to one another. Help us to remember that we are connected to all people and to every part of this earth home that we cherish. Calm our anxiety in these troubled times so that we may be fully present to each other and to the needs of the world around us. May we be strengthened to care for each other, to care for those beyond these walls, to work for peace and justice for all people everywhere, and to care for this beautiful and fragile earth that we share. In the silence, let us center ourselves in love, compassion, and courage. I invite you now to call out the names of those who are on your hearts so that we may hold them in our loving compassion. May all those whose names were spoken and those that remain unspoken in our hearts find peace and healing this day. And now we invite Lisa Steinmetz to share a little bit with us about her father, Ebe, a longtime member of this congregation.
My father, Ib Steinmetz, passed away on June 1st, 2024, in Brașov, Romania, while on vacation. Upon learning of his death, I immediately flew there and spent 12 days in Brașov and Bucharest, ensuring that my father would be brought back to the United States with the honor and the dignity he so deserved. Many of you know my father, Ib Steinmetz, a long-standing member and a strong financial supporter of the First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware. He brought our family here over 50 years ago, and I'm so grateful that he introduced us to Unitarianism. Growing up in this church during the time of Bob Doss era in the 1970s, I had countless happy memories of this amazing congregation. Our youth group was intellectually stimulating and fun. We played the best music, weekly meetings, playing Kansas, Genesis, Led Zeppelin, and occasionally disco. The church hosted everything from spooky Halloween parties to profound spiritual retreats. Some of my fondest memories are the campouts in the Shenandoah Mountains, led by my father and Dave Shepard, who many of you probably remember. My father was a member of the ski team, and later in life he joined the choir. He loved his weekly brown bag group meetings. Ib was a true intellectual, yet remained kind and humble. The church has always been a source of joy and community for our family. Every Sunday, I looked forward to coming to the First Unitarian Church with my father and my mom and my brother Carl. We found it not only intellectually stimulating, but a place of calm reflection. When my mother, Alma Steinmetz, died, she passed away in 2019, we held her funeral right here, surrounded by the love and support of this entire community. We wouldn't have it any other way. Due to the circumstances of my father's passing in a foreign country, which I mentioned in the beginning, we were unable to have his funeral here at this church. And that's why I'm speaking to you here today in his honor. My dad believed deeply in supporting religious freedom, a value shaped by his experience growing up in Denmark in World War II. This church had a profound impact on my father's life and our entire family through generations. Even though now I live in California, this church has always been my safe place. I can tell you every hiding place in this downstairs bathroom everywhere. I know he will be greatly, greatly missed here at this church. Reverend Richard Speck gave a wonderful funeral for my father on Friday, where he was laid to rest at Birmingham Lafayette Cemetery. My father was a guiding light in this world, not only for me, but for many others. One of the greatest gifts my father gave me was teaching me to think like a Unitarian, to have an open mind, and to teach my children to be enlightened and learn from all perspectives. He taught us to reserve judgment and to listen to all points of views. Back in the day of the Unitarian Church, we sometimes would take field trips and go to other places of worships, such as the Catholic Church and a Jewish synagogue. It was a fantastic way to learn about the religious world with an open mind. My father, being a conservative, was always willing to challenge and consider his points of view and others' points of view. He was a true Unitarian to the core. Steinmetz was a wonderful human being, and he'll be greatly missed by many. Rest in peace, Dad. I love you. This is him. Thank you.
Thank you for that tribute, Lisa. It was beautifully expressed, very much made me wish I had known your father. And the qualities that you were lifting up and emphasizing, his insistence on looking at different points of view and being open to hearing other perspectives, could not have dovetailed better with the theme of the morning had we planned it for months. So I feel as though you've set me up beautifully to have the guiding voice of a longtime member of this church sort of standing at my shoulder. And I thank you for that very much. My reading this morning comes from Robert Ingersoll. Many of you are probably familiar with Ingersoll. He was, and now I need to find my notes about him because, here we go. I just want to, just for context, he was an American lawyer and writer and orator in the mid to late 1800s. That's what I couldn't quite remember. He was known as the Great Agnostic, and in fact was part of a celebrated heresy trial because he did not believe in God, or he kept an open mind about whether or not to believe in God, something that may sound familiar to many of us. This reading is from his essay, Why I Am an Agnostic. Let us be honest with ourselves. In the presence of countless mysteries, standing beneath the boundless heaven sown thick with constellations, knowing that each grain of sand, each leaf, each blade of grass asks of every mind the answerless question, knowing that the simplest thing defies solution, feeling that we deal with the superficial and the relative, and that we are ever eluded by the real, the absolute. Let us admit the limitations of our minds, and let us have the courage and the candor to say, we do not know. Well, there are many things I am willing to admit I do not know. One thing I do know is how pleased I am to be with you all this morning, and I want to just offer my appreciation to Reverend Larry for inviting me to come this summer and be with you again. I also want to let you know in advance and apologize for the fact that I have to leave quite promptly after the service because of a family commitment back home. It's always a pleasure to visit other UU congregations. And one of the great pleasures of being mostly retired is the chance to do quite a bit of guest preaching and go from congregation to congregation and meet lots of different people. We differ in so many ways, and yet there's always this immediate sense of connection and community and common ground. And that is particularly meaningful to me now because that feeling of community, for me at least, and perhaps for many of you, took a real hit over the last 4 years. I'm still feeling the effects of all the isolation that we went through and that some folks are still going through. Obviously, it varied a lot from person to person because some people had jobs during the pandemic that meant they had to keep showing up and being connected to other people even when they might have preferred to isolate. And others chose to take more risks than others and prioritize connection over caution. But I think all of us experienced, to different degrees, a changed rhythm to our lives, reduced options, and limited connections. And now, of course, it's 4 years later, and most of us have returned to what we think of as normal life. And for some, that was really easy and joyful, and for others, it's been a little harder than we expected it to be. Which brings me to the fact that as happy as I am to be with you all this morning, I also have a little edge of ambivalence about it. I'm still a little edgy about being in enclosed rooms with groups of people for any length of time. And I'm painfully aware that that has become very much a minority position now. We've all had different responses to this shift back to normal life, and some folks were done with the pandemic really quickly. They threw away their masks and went right back to dining out, doing karaoke in crowded bars. I don't know, I was trying to think of the most extreme example I could of not feeling cautious. And some folks took it a lot more slowly, doing a lot of risk assessment along the way with each activity. Some people are still mostly just staying home, avoiding all but necessary contacts. We're just still not all in the same place. And because of some immune issues in our household, you may have noticed whenever I'm not speaking, I'm remaining masked in a group setting like this. But increasingly, I find in various places that I go that I am the only person wearing a mask, and I've begun to get some looks, eye rolls. It seems that a lot of people who are done with the pandemic think that therefore I should also be done with the pandemic, and I would love to be done with the pandemic. I find myself feeling very defensive, feeling as though I need to justify to them why I'm wearing a mask, to say, look, this is not a political statement. This is about my immune-compromised family members. Please try to understand. And noticing those reactions from other people and the reactions within me have helped me to realize just how much the pandemic has highlighted our tendency to pigeonhole one another on the basis of very little information. I say the pandemic highlighted this. I don't think it created the dynamic. I think we've been this way as a culture for a long time, but it has become much more obvious in recent years because there are these very vivid symbolic things, and we are so good at snap judgments based on one or two pieces of information. Very small symbols become indicators of which side someone is on. Mask or no mask is one example. American flag on the pickup truck is another. Hate has no home here sign in the front yard. Black Lives Matter lapel pin. Or the one I saw that I'm still trying to figure out that said gun rights are women's rights. But we take one look at one of these symbols and we think we know everything we need to know about another person. Now, one of my guilty secrets is that I love reading mysteries and watching detective series on television. And one of the reasons is that it's usually pretty easy to know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and to know which side to be on. And that kind of certainty is very comforting. It's that feeling of knowing the answers, knowing who's right and who's wrong and where I fit. But that's fiction. And in real life, the answers are often far more complicated and nuanced than we like to acknowledge. And our work is to get beneath the code words and the symbols that seem to tell us so much about each other and look for the deeper truths. Now, I stumbled across an article last year that lifted up what a deep and urgent need this is in our larger culture right now. That was a year ago. I think it's even more urgent now than it was a year ago. And it offers a strategy for how to go about the hard work of going deeper. The article was in the Hedgehog Review, and it's by Alan Levinovitz, who's a professor in the Philosophy and Religion department at James Madison University. And it caught my eye at first, mainly just because of the title, In Praise of Bewilderment. And my first reaction was, finally, someone who is affirming my natural condition, because I spend much of my life feeling somewhat bewildered. Levinovitz begins by saying, there is hope for America's ailing soul. It draws on a standard teaching technique familiar to anyone reading these words, bewilderment. And then he goes on to describe the way that he leads his students to question their assumptions and recognize the complexity of the issues that they're studying. They start out absolutely certain, for example, that science and religion are utterly incompatible ways of knowing and experiencing the world. You're either scientific or you're religious. It's one or the other, period. They are certain of this. But, he says, when someone is certain, it's very hard to learn. So, he says, I begin with bewilderment. Are you familiar with Gregor Mendel, the 19th century Roman Catholic friar, whose mathematical acumen and love of biology gave us the earliest known laws of genetic heredity? Did you know Sir Isaac Newton wrote much more about religion and astrology, no, not astronomy, astrology, than physics. Maybe you find history dull. Then consider Dr. Francis Collins, former director of the National Institutes of Health, leader of the Human Genome Project, and avowed evangelical Christian. He finds that his students at first resist this kind of exploration. They don't want their assumptions challenged. But he meets their arguments with counter-arguments until they are deep into the complexities of the interplay between science and religion. And he says, and I quote, "Eventually, if we're lucky, we achieve bewilderment." Fine, what is the relationship between religion and science? And there, in the space created by uncertainty and ambiguity, learning can begin. That space is humble, open, flexible. My students discover that I'm right there in it with them. I don't have the answers either. We work together, think things through, and as in any good class, we emerge changed, not validated. I want to repeat a few lines of that quote. In the space created by uncertainty and ambiguity, learning can begin. That space is humble, open, flexible. We emerge changed, not validated. And I need to acknowledge that this leads me to another reason why I feel ambivalent about standing here before you this morning, because I'm preaching yet another sermon about something that I think is exceedingly important and that I rarely manage to put into practice. I think the hardest thing for me, at least, Richard and I should have a conversation about this one of these days, about writing sermons, is the way that it constantly reminds me of the chasm between who I am and who I think I ought to be. I am often not willing to enter that space of ambiguity and uncertainty that Levinovitz describes, where learning, real learning, can take place. If I'm honest, I'm often more interested in having other people recognize the validity of where I'm coming from and realize that I'm right. Wouldn't everything be better if everybody thought like I did? But as Levinovitz points out, that attitude makes it very hard to learn. Now, the illustration that Levinovitz used about science and religion was especially helpful to me. I think it's something that, as Unitarian Universalists, many of us wrestle with, where that balance is. I am a Unitarian Universalist minister who takes spirituality very seriously. I'm married to an atheist organic geochemist. And it also, the tension that he described led me to my choice for the morning's reading. I discovered Robert Ingersoll when I was in college, and I devoured his writing at the time. I still have pages and pages and pages of quotations that I typed up on my old manual portable typewriter from some of his books of essays and sermons. I was deeply moved at the time as my own spirituality was beginning to develop, and yet I was absolutely sure that I did not believe in God. I struggled with that tension, and I was deeply moved by his ability to claim the power of mystery and awe in the face of the universe without also claiming any kind of traditional religious belief. Now, his views were far more radical in his day, of course, than they seem now, or even when I stumbled across them in the early 80s. But I felt at the time so validated by his vehemence. Let us have the courage and the candor to say we do not know. It was music to a defiant young Unitarian's ears. Now, over time, as I revisited Ingersoll, I came to hear echoes of arrogance in those words. We are the courageous ones. We have the courage and the candor to say we do not know. The rest of you are too timid or dishonest to admit it, and you cling instead to your ridiculous religious systems, which is kind of the Unitarianism attitude I grew up with, I have to admit. But maybe Ingersoll didn't mean it that way. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. And certainly for me, as a young adult, he opened a door that allowed me to continue to hold my commitment to rationalism while also claiming a commitment to spirituality grounded in the beauty and wonder of the world. So perhaps he too was a bridge in his way between religion and science. But I wanted to use his words for another reason as well, and that one is a cautionary one. Because I'm often struck by the way that we Unitarian Universalists, who put such an emphasis on being willing to admit we don't know when it comes to theology, tend to be so extremely sure that we do know when it comes to everything else. We have done this consistently, even within our own movement, even about theology. We have often argued vehemently with one another about the right way not to know. The early Unitarians ostracized the Transcendentalists as they emerged within the movement. We had a long stretch where humanists and theists battled over who had the right to be here. Unitarian Universalist Christians often still feel marginalized. As a member now of a small Mennonite congregation, I can attest to this fact. And we do the same thing with social issues. We dig in our heels not only about the right causes to embrace, but also about the very specific methodology that must be used in order to do the work of those causes. Let there be no diversity of opinion among us about the right way to do the right thing. We don't seem to have much capacity for bewilderment because we're always so sure that we're right. Now, Levinovitz starts his article by affirming that bewilderment provides, quote, hope for America's ailing soul. And lately, I sure feel like we need to find some way to be hopeful for America's ailing soul. Clearly, Levinovitz believes that we need to bring this kind of openness and humility into public dialogue of all kinds. He acknowledges that it's hard and frightening to move into that state of bewilderment, to be less sure that we know what we think we know. But he argues, and again I quote, the resulting worldview is more useful and more beautiful because it genuinely reflects reality. That's why a synonym for bewilderment is wonder, which at least for me is not terrifying, but exhilarating. Now, I like wonder as a synonym for bewilderment. My sister told me years ago that when she comes up against someone, and hear the language I'm using, comes up against someone, I'm using confrontational language to describe two people who think differently encountering one another. That's how ingrained it is in me. When she encounters someone whose opinion is very different from her own, uncomfortably different, she tries to approach them with an attitude of witness and wonder. Witness, pay attention in a serious way to what the person is saying, thinking, experiencing, and then wonder. Try to imagine where those thoughts and ideas might be coming from, why the person feels the way they do. Now, trying to understand does not necessarily mean we end up agreeing with someone. And Levinovitz is definitely not saying we should always agree. He says clearly, allowing bewilderment to infuse our approach to an issue does not mean we cannot have strong beliefs. Of course, we'll still have strong differences of opinion on all kinds of issues, and we'll still need to take stands. But he argues if we can bring some of that sense of bewilderment into a conversation with someone who disagrees with us, the conversation turns into a dialogue instead of an argument, he says. We make progress instead of war. Now, Levinovitz is talking about big issues, religion and science, abortion, politics at every level. He sees us as a nation heading in the wrong direction, toward more and more certainty and rigidity on both sides of every issue. And he argues that we can buck that trend if we are willing to cultivate bewilderment in ourselves and by our example to encourage its cultivation in others. And theoretically, I think that's exactly right. And I also think it's a really big ask. So often I assume that the person on the other side is not going to meet me in that vulnerable space. That I'm going to go there, that if I'm going to go there, and often I'm not willing, if I'm willing to go there, there's no guarantee that they will also question their assumptions and be willing to witness and wonder where I'm coming from. So it feels very risky to cede any ground to those people and their ideas, whoever they may be in any given context. I feel under threat, and so I dig in my heels and I defend my side as the right side. But then I have to stop and ask myself, how is that working for me, really? How is it working for us as a nation? Levinovitz uses the metaphor of spandex to illustrate the way that bewilderment functions in public dialogue. Think about how clothing is more flexible and resilient, able to accommodate different shapes when you add a little spandex. As he says, you can still squat without ripping your pants. That's how bewilderment benefits culture. He says the fabric of our society is increasingly inflexible, brittle, fragile. Our rigid ideologies are ready to crack under the slightest pressure. But this is a democracy, and we can fight against the inertia of tyrannical certainty one person at a time. We can cultivate bewilderment in ourselves, and by our own example, encourage its cultivation in others. We can admit, with the relief of honesty, that some questions are genuinely difficult. We can reject the rigid binaries forced upon us by a sense of crisis, and we can recognize that our resistance to doing so isn't in the service of making progress, but rather a way of protecting ourselves. And then he closes by saying, I have hope for our collective soul, which, if we have the courage, can stretch and change instead of tearing itself apart. Well, I would certainly rather see us stretch and change than tear ourselves apart, as we seem to be doing now as a nation. And if it feels too daunting to jump right into this discipline of bewilderment when facing the great chasms of our culture, the good news is that there's plenty of room to practice right here. Because in my experience, it's hard enough to cultivate that attitude of witness and wonder, even among the people I'm closest to, the ones I respect and appreciate and even love. Even in a community like this that defines itself by its common values, we contain a wide range of experiences and opinions. Whether it's where we are on pandemic precautions or our personal theology or a variety of social and political issues, we have plenty of differences among us, and we can be quick to take sides and judge even among ourselves. And I believe that if there's any hope of our learning to enter a state of bewilderment with folks who are very, very different than we are, it lies in our learning right here to witness and wonder, to meet differences with curiosity rather than judgment, to be less sure that we know the definitive answer, and more convinced that we can get to it together. So I invite you to join me in search of and in praise of bewilderment. Let us, at least sometimes, have the courage and the candor to say, we do not know, and really mean it. And then, maybe, we'll begin to learn.
Thank you, Lotus. That was beautiful. And thank you, David, for offering to step up and share your voice with us. And thank you, Reverend Libby, for those words. That was a wonderful message to have at this time. In Ingersoll's defense, I would say that there are many outside of this community. There are most places in my life where it takes courage to stand up and say, I'm an atheist. So, agnostic even is a cause for someone to mistrust me, let alone saying I'm an atheist, and then, I'm Satan himself. So, for all our faults, I think First Unitarian is a place when you can come to when you're feeling humble and bewildered, and you don't have to pretend that you got it all figured out. And you don't just have to nod and smile and go along. So the offering that we take each Sunday isn't just a stale habit. And I want to thank Erica Hewitt, whoever she is, for these words, because I adapted them. It isn't just a stale habit, it's an opportunity to recommit to this place and to these people, to our staff and to our comfortable climate-controlled facilities, to our ongoing adult practice groups and our children's religious exploration programs, to our social justice programs and our pastoral care, and to our music program. Special shout out for them. Our offering is an affirmation, a yes. When we give, we say yes to something we value. With our gifts freely given, may we say yes to the values of our faith. May our offering help us practice Unitarian Universalism within and beyond our congregation as tools to empower our mission. The ways to donate electronically will appear on your screens during the offering music, and the ushers, will you please come forward with the cloth offering baskets. Speaking of still coming back to old habits from the pandemic, we have revived our offering, and the ushers will pass those baskets as we hear the offering music. So first, please join me in dedicating our offering to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives, and these are offerings. I didn't thank the AV team. Thank you, AV team. Good work as usual. Well, we now extinguish our chalice, but we will carry within us the energy of curiosity, the warmth of this beloved community, and the light of openness.
Words of benediction come from the writing of Barbara Hamilton Holway. Go now in peace. Deeply regard each other. Truly listen to each other. Speak what each of you must speak. Be ready in any moment to disarm your own heart, and always live as if a reign of love had begun. So be it. Amen. Blessed be. And now, I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in our closing hymn, number 121, We'll Build a Land.
Anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll.